ze gaan u net beginnen uit.
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Goedenavond iedereen. Samen met Bozar organiseert A+ voor de 5e keer een A+ Talk, een thematische lezing over een bouwmateriaal. Dit jaar zijn verschillende sprekers uitgenodigd om dieper in te gaan op het gebruik van steen in hun praktijk. Les deux intervenants ce soir vont nous faire part de leur façon d'utiliser la pierre et les défis que cet élément constructif induit dans leur pratique. Pour ce faire, le paysagiste belge Bas Smets abordera l'utilisation de la pierre à travers son approche urbanistique et paysagère qu'il qualifie d'urbanisme biosphérique en nous présentant plusieurs de ses projets. Amin Taha van het Britse collectief Groupwork geeft nadien meer inzicht in het project 15 Clerkenwell Close, een woon- en kantoorgebouw in het centrum van Londen. Dit project werd voltooid in 2017 en leverde het bureau een nominatie op voor een EU Mies Award 2019. Leurs présentations seront suivies d'un débat modéré par Lisa de Vicher, directrice d'A+. Avant de donner la parole aux intervenants, nous tenons à remercier Bozar pour avoir coproduit cet événement, ainsi que Pierre et Marbre de Wallonie, qui est le sponsor principal de cette conférence, la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, de Vlaamse Overheid, la région de Bruxelles-Capitale, ainsi que la ville de Bruxelles. I wish you all a good lecture, and now please welcome Bas Smets.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, A+ and Bozar, for the invitation. I'm particularly happy to show you today 4 of our projects closely related to the use of stone. But first I would like to speak about 2 inspirations that are very important for us in all of our projects. This first image you may know, it's Alexander von Humboldt coming back from his explorations in the Americas, who makes this beautiful map of the Chimborazo, and he notes all the measurements he's been taking from humidity, latitude, altitude, vegetation, even the blueness of the sky. He would try to measure and to understand how things are interrelated, which is really a keystone of our practice. A second inspiration is Vladimir Vernadsky. He did not draw this drawing, but he is a mineralogist from Ukraine, and he developed geochemistry. He was really interested in defining the biosphere as the combination of all living organisms and all organisms that would have lived. And in his opinion, the crust of the earth is made out of former life, and many of the stones, many of the sediment stones, are basically former life compressed into a new substance. So with these 2 inspirations, we have been working in many countries. I started the office 15 years ago. We've developed about 500 projects, out of which 50 were built in Europe, but also all around the globe. And I will show you 4 of these projects. The first one, number 15, as you can see, they're all numbered chronologically. So one of the first projects in 2007-8, I think. I was asked by Jan Mannaerts from 360 Architects to develop 4 courtyards of een woon- en zorgcentrum, a home for the elderly that they had one in Lomel. And it was interesting, this idea of 4 courtyards where many of these people will spend the rest of their lives. There were different types of communities, from more active communities to more passive communities, and we thought, if this is a kind of a hortus conclusus, a kind of a walled garden, how can we bring the world to that garden? How can we give as much experiences, as much sensory emotions to these people that for the most part are confined to that space? And so we thought, we made abstraction of the buildings, as you can see, and we thought, can we see those courtyards as a kind of a fragmented, continuous landscape where trees, let's say, ignore the buildings and create a continuous growth, where plants could grow, where we could bring the seasons, the colors, and the smells, and where we could have a kind of a miniature world in which these people could live and in which they could relate to. And the first question, of course, was what kind of hardscape do we make? What is this made of? And we had a very limited budget. The OCMW has a kind of a fixed budget per square meters with which basically I could do not many more than concrete or maybe brick. And I was a bit saddened by that. And I remember going to the quarry of Hainaut and speaking to the responsible persons there that are, by the way, in the room here. And I thought, or I told them, like, is there not a way of using your material, bluestone, the most typical stone of Belgium, but for a lower price? And they told me that basically the leftover materials they would cut into strips of 20 centimeters. I don't know if they still do. But so we made the whole project based on those 20 centimeters and based on a variable length using materials that is not A grade, but it is affordable with the budget we had. And so we thought, can we use those materials and then work on a kind of surface treatment to give them a kind of a flat topography. So all of the hardscape in bluestone, we invented a kind of a water element that would ebb and flow. So we thought of bringing that element of time into the courtyard through the water, and we even used the bluestone in gravel for a possible field of pétanque. And so using these elements specifically out of stone, having all those trees, having all those plants, we came up with this very special landscape. And here is the quarry. And so, okay, I ordered my stones cut to 20 centimeters, but I wanted more. And so I asked if I could have some rocks. And they gave me 35 tons for free. You'll have all the architects now asking you for stones for free. And then this guy in his tractor drove for, we calculated just earlier, for about 6 or 7 hours at 40 kilometers per hour with his 30 tons of stones. And we made this kind of Belgian Zen garden, if you like, with our blue stones cut to 20 centimeters, the gravel, and then these big stones and a number of fern trees in between. So a very kind of calm landscape where here all the therapy rooms would look out to. Here you see this water element that ebbs and flows with time. A very calm landscape in which we planted ginkgo trees which are the oldest living trees on the planet. They have survived for 150 million years. And they bring this beautiful yellow autumn to the central plaza, but also to the gardens around this home for the elderly. And we together with the architects, we fought hard to get the trees very close to these terraces, so that anybody in a wheelchair that could not move around much could just go to his terrace and enjoy these trees very close to where he would have his room. Second project, 171, a bit later. We must be 2012, I think, 2013. In Paris, from Lomel to Paris to La Défense. And right here, this is the Knit, this is the Grande Arche. Here is a road called l'Avenue de la Division Leclerc that enters into the esplanade of La Défense. And a smart developer found, if I remember well, 1,000 foundations on either side to cover this urban boulevard and to build a skyscraper on top of it. This is the construction of the skyscraper. And he asked me to design the 4,000 square meters of bridge structure in between the level of the esplanade and the level of the city. And I was thinking, how can you make a landscape for such a strange situation? Above ground, in between these buildings, with all the reflections of the light, with the wind pattern disturbed. And I thought, actually, we're quite close to a kind of mineral situation as here in the Mont Blanc. And when you walk in the Mont Blanc, and we do quite some walking, there is this idea of the tree line, when you're underneath the canopy of the trees, you're protected from the sun, you're protected from the wind, you have a microclimate that is very clear. When you're walking there, the moment you leave the tree line, you're exposed to the elements. So I thought, can we not understand La Défense as a kind of temporary mountain range, and can we not bring this tree line in between the peaks of those mountains? And can we not imagine staircases like avalanches of stones flowing down all the way towards the ground? And so the design of the project became the search of planting as many trees as possible within that bridge structure. As many trees as possible, first ambition, second ambition, have everything in stone, so you really feel the minerality of that space. And so working with the structural engineers, we looked at the plan, the staircases, the beams that hold up the structure, the roads for the fire trucks, the roads for the disabled. And so we came up with this plan of non-plantable area and planted all the rest. And we used a computer program to maximize the number of trees. And I remember the developer in the beginning had told me that I had to plant at least 9 trees because that was part of his building permit. We planted 50 without any order except for an opportunity of trees to plant. So we tried to mimic the logics of nature that want to plant wherever it can root. And so similarly here, we planted those trees in only 53 centimeters of earth, but 53 centimeters deployed over 4,000 square meters, creating 2,000 cubic meters of planting medium. And what a tree needs is volume, not depth. We worked hard with the structural engineers to come up with this continuous layer of earth in between these little plows on which we put the beams, and on the beams we put the slabs. Here you can see another detail we invented. So these are the metal cages attached to the concrete columns, filled up with earth, and then beautiful slabs of granite du Lomel, French granite, with open joints placed immediately up on those beams, so all the rainwater goes straight to those 2,000 cubic meters of soil. And today you get this very, I would say, mountain-like feeling when you're there. Everything is stone, and you have trees sticking out of that carpet of stone. We worked hard not to have any details. There's no gutter, there's no manholes, there's no references to anything technical, only stones, staircases, and even the railings made out of stone. The trees had been prepared in a nursery in Belgium so that they would have flat root balls with quite some height already at planting. This is a couple of years ago, but you can see how the tree line is developing and how those 50 trees will create a microclimate above that layer of stone. Again, you see these massive stones flowing down between La Défense and Courbevoie. Back to Belgium, to Brussels. This is a very special project. This is the Forêt de Soigne, where, if I go back, 292, this was 2017. In November, we had an exhibition at Bozar, which was called The Invention of Landscape. And at the end of the exhibition, there was a dinner organized by Paul Dujardin with the Minister of Environment who had paid for the exhibition. And during that dinner, she tells me that she was a friend of a victim of the attacks in the Brussels airport had come to her to ask if she could plant a tree in her favorite garden, or sorry, in her favorite park, because that victim was a foreigner, so the body was back to the home country, but she wanted something to commemorate the victim. And Céline Frémaux, who was the Ministry of Environment, said, but actually instead of planting one tree for one victim, during that dinner she says, I want to plant 32 trees for the 32 deadly victims, not in a park in Brussels, but I want to plant it in the Forêt de Soigne. And I remember I told her that's interesting, but how are you going to plant a tree in a forest? I mean, the forest normally takes care of itself. There's not a space left for a tree. And she told me, well, I don't know, do you want to help me? I was like, sure, I'll help you. And so the next day we went to walk into the forest next to the Hippodrome de Boisfort, and looking for a space, but we didn't find one. So she told me, like, take your time. Well, she told me, take your time, you have about 2 weeks, because I wanted to be ready for the first year of commemoration on the 22nd of March 2017. The attacks happened in 2016. And I remember for a couple of weeks I would go to the forest every morning before going to the office, walking around, and you see November mist, looking for a place. They told me that if you need to cut a tree, we can manage. I mean, the national importance is so high that we can find a way to deal with it. But I thought, no, we're not going to cut a tree to plant a new one. And so I looked for a clearing in the forest, and I found a natural clearing where a couple of trees had fell down not long ago, as you can see here. And I thought it would be nice to plant those trees in a natural clearing. And so this is the hippodrome, and we looked at the water. You have these little ponds here, Hoefijzermeer, for those who know. You have these little waterways that feed them. You have these paths. And so we found, first I found a space while walking, and then looking more into the plans, we found out that we were actually on a little ridge in between those two little valleys. We're on a high point, which I thought was nice. And there was this little path going next to it. So we thought, okay, we have this clearing. Now we're going to plant 32 trees. And again, we're November. We're coming to the end of the year. It needed to be opened in March. I had meetings with the associations of the victims, who told me, we don't want any official. I mean, we have already all these commemorative plaques in the city, in the airport, in the metro. We want something for us. We want a place that nobody knows and only we know where it is. We said, okay, but that's a bit difficult. But so the choice of the space was really related to their wish to have a space for them where they could go with their kids, and where they could have a moment of contemplation, a moment of solace. So I was thinking, planting 32 trees, it's a nice gesture, but it's not enough. I mean, a forest is trees, only trees won't do. So I told the minister, we need more. We need stones. We need something more anchored. And of course, I wanted blue stones. Blue stone is the tombal stone by excellence in Belgium for centuries, if not more. So I thought, can we not have blue stones that help create this circle of trees? And I remember I called the quarries that I knew, and at Renier, they told me they could get those stones and they could get them ready in time, which was quite a challenge, because every stone is cut into a segment of a circle. So every stone took about 24 hours to cut. 32 times 24, you're already 1 month cutting stones that still needed to be placed. And so I remember this meeting we had, I think it was at the end of December, where everybody told me, like, okay, it's not possible because of this, it's not possible because of this, because of timing, because of budget, because of all the kind of agreements or validations we need to have. And I remember I told them, like, okay, now that we know it's not possible, let's see how we're going to build it. And so we set about 32 trees, 32 blocks of stones. The stones are on a perfect horizontal. So on one way you can easily enter the circle, on the other side it becomes a bench, and it reveals the natural slope of the valley towards this little waterway. We fixed the center of the point based on the trees around it, so the center of the void was a very important moment. Here you see, I think this is January, when we still had snow, validating the center point, and then very carefully making the foundations, not touching the forest soil, getting the blocks to cut them to size, as you can see, so perfectly segmented to create this perfect circle in the forest. And I thought it was very interesting how the stones delimitate a circle in the ground, while the trees create a circle in the sky. So it's so kind of very symbolical and a very minimal way of making this monument. In a sense, maybe the most minimal project we've done, only using trees and stones, basically the two materials I like to work with the most. Here you can see this kind of strange, I would say, congregation of trees in a circle, and we planted them at a distance of two persons holding hands. We tried in the office with different sizes to make the kind of right choice. So it's 32 people standing in a circle, and when you're in the middle, you're getting to see this kind of a void cut out of the sky. Every year, there is a commemoration organized with choir, with one year is choir, another year is a guy playing the violin, and so it's in a sense it's a very active memorial. One day I was walking around, and I remember it was in November, and I saw flowers. I thought that's strange because normally it's in March the commemoration, but then on the flowers was written commemorating the victims of the hotel attack in Bamako. So in a sense it became a kind of symbol for different types of attacks. And I've heard that they also do yoga at midnight, so strange things happening there. Here you see a Google Earth that shows a circle as well. And from this project came a kind of an offspring. A couple of years ago, I was asked by Us Knops, who is a psychiatrist, if we could not come up with a monument for the victims of COVID. And the idea was to work with different cities and towns I would be interested, and to make a kind of, or it's my idea to make a kind of series of monuments that would relate to each other, almost like variants. Just like COVID kept on having new variants, we thought, can we make a kind of family of variants of monuments for those victims? This is the one in Kortrijk. This is the one in Ghent. This is the one in Lomel, back to Lomel. And every time we looked for a landscape that we would reveal through our intervention, always a perfect horizontal circle, always 13 elements, so missing 5, as a kind of perfect circle disrupted by a natural force, not a virus, but a tree in this case, but always a natural force creating a disruption of this perfect circle. This is in Aarschot. And here we didn't use natural stones, or we did use natural stones, but always mixed into a concrete element. Here, for example, we used ijzerzandsteen, iron stone that refers to this historical binding behind the tree. But so it was a very interesting moment that this kind of first monument suddenly created this offspring. There's 4 of them that are built, and 2 more will follow. One in Brussels and one in Leuven. And from this project I go to the last one. This is a project I developed with Eliane Leroux. We called it Biospheric Bench, and I come back to Vernadsky, to his theory of the crust of the earth being made by living organisms, and living organisms as a force that changes as a geological force. That's how he would call it. And here we were quite inspired by these mountains that follow this kind of triangular shape. There's a lot of theories about it that I would not go into, but these triangulars we thought was an interesting mineral element, which we then found on the floor of the San Marco Basilique in Venice. And so we thought, can we not make a bench that kind of compresses these million years of atmospheric activity, of life dying, being compressed into a stone, and that stone then having these characteristics. And so we came up with what we call the biospheric bench, and this idea that you would sit on millions and millions of former life held together by these bands that are of course made from petroleum, which also is fossils, so former life. So only former life that creates these benches that we showed at the Valerie Traan in Antwerp, 2018, if I remember well, made up of different types of stones, mostly unused stones that we got at Van de Wege in Zulte. And I end with this last image of these stones in a kind of a conclusion where for us stone is life. For us stone is former life. For us stone is a kind of compression of time, is a compression of materiality. And if I could choose, I would only make projects with trees and stones. Thank you very much.
Straight in. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I think I'm going straight in, aren't I? Yeah. Okay, I've divided this talk into two parts. And the first part really is an explanation of why we do what we do. And in some respects, a criticism of architectural education, how it's been perhaps for the last 250 years. Etymology, as in the origins, and I'll start off with Giorgio Vasari, so some of you will know he's an artist, sculptor, and architect of the 16th century in Florence, and he wrote what we would understand today as the first history of art and architecture book, titled The Most Excellent Artists, Sculptors and Architects, and he of course included himself amongst them. What differentiates that book from later books on art and architecture is that he was a painter, sculptor and architect, and he understood that you go through a learning system, specifically in Florence and in Italy at that period, an apprenticeship system, so 14 or younger. You learn about whatever material. So if you're a sculptor, you're essentially working in a quarry with stone, understanding how to cut that stone out, which way the stone is orientated for building purposes as well as sculptural purposes, before you begin to sculpt it. So you start off with the material as it is. And similarly with painting and then the architecture. 200 years later, Johann Winkelmann is essentially a librarian. He's working as a librarian for an aristocrat. He's paid, he's professional, it's the Enlightenment period, and he is effectively your proto-academic. He is the father of archaeology as a proper discipline, and really, as we understand it today, the father of art history. He is not an architect, artist, or sculptor. He travels to Greece and Rome, the ancient world, and his book replaces Vasari's on the bookshelves of all libraries. And his observations are, I mean, first of all, the first thing he does is put everything in a timeline. So it's the first book that really says the work of the ancients and spans it chronologically. So it's great for learning. Of course, he's going to make some mistakes. All of us make errors. And his first observations that we understand today are obviously an error that were also debated at the time, as that the sculpture and architecture of the ancient period was monochrome. It was the stone itself, but obviously it was polychrome as we know today. But the important differentiation really is that you have one person who understands the nature of making and defines architecture, specifically today for us, as the nature of making. You make and then you define. So the verb is there before the noun, yeah? While the other, Winkelmann, is an observer. He's giving things nouns, and speculating on how they might be made. In some respects, not even interested in how they're made. And his rallying call, his first book is a bestseller. Well, once you have a bestseller, you're bound to produce another book. But obviously, it's not another chronological timeline of art and architecture. It is his opinions, and he labels it my opinions. In my opinion, Greek is better than anything else, principally because, remember, it's the Enlightenment period. He's saying the Greek are democratic, it's a republic, and the art and architecture is representative of a republic, a better people. And if we're ever going to be as great as the Greeks or better, we must build like the Greeks. He's not an architect, he's not a sculptor, he doesn't make anything. But his observations, his archaeological observations, his drawings then give life to neoclassical architecture of that period. And all schools of architecture pretty much changed. I mean, there weren't formal schools of architecture as we understand them today. There were academies run by architects, qualified masons that then submit their masterpieces and become architects. But as soon as they became more formalized, and Britain was one of the first, no more working with your hands. And Britain created the first equivalent of the Institute for Architects. And it was decided that from then on, only architects who ever draw, never work with their hands or understand the nature of those materials, only they will be defined legally as architects. And really that's what we've had since. It didn't take long. It didn't take long for a crisis in architecture to exist, where people are scratching their heads saying, what are all these motifs and decorations and forms that we're following? Auguste Choisy, Gottfried Semper, Karl Berteker, all looking for the origins of the architecture and quickly realizing, well, actually, their origins are in the making of it, even the Greek, and really abstracted in stone, but culturally relevant. And at that time, middle of the 19th century, Industrial Revolution, in England, we revert to the Gothic revival. In Germany, we have Carl Friedrich Schinkel, who's the I don't know, what do we call him? The leader of the neoclassical period. He actually comes to England to tour the whole of England, but ostensibly to look at the British Museum. And he has a moment of crisis because he realizes that all these buildings during the Industrial Revolution in England are going up with no reference to the classical language, really, very little reference. And Semper is in London a few years later. Gottfried Semper, Karl Berteker is sent by Schinkel to dig into this. And they all agree that really all forms of architecture have their nature in understanding what those building materials are and how you combine them. So Semper eventually coins the phrase joining, binding, and completion being whatever method is convenient at that age, that time, becomes commonplace, culturally relevant. It is the completion of that architecture, and it should always change. Hopefully, obviously Wagner, Adolf Loos, and Vienna are picking up on Semper's teaching, and hopefully most of you will know that Henri van der Velde is actually the father of the Bauhaus. So he's in Germany, but it's post First World War. He's not allowed to become head. He recommends Walter Gropius, all of whom are also picking up on the Semper mission of what is this architecture of the new industrial age, and eventually they find it. And we might characterize it as this. As the bicycle tube that's turned into a chair and so on with the architecture. Interestingly, at that very same time in Spain, we have Federico de Onis, who's a professor of literature. He's teaching Dali and Lorca and Buñuel, and he's arguing we are already in a postmodern period. Why on earth are we looking for yet another dictum? We should really be looking as broadly as possible for representation from every cultural reference that is available, especially in Spain. Obviously, Spain has got a broader, deeper history than most contexts. Eventually, they all have to leave. A lot of them do leave. And the idea of post-modernity is not really picked up for another 50 years until Ihab Hassanaj and Francois Lyotard are running a conference on post-modernity and talk about the postmodern condition. However, as architects, what do we do? At that time, Charles Jenks is looking to publish a book called New Radicalism. But he's pressured and finds himself publishing it as the postmodern architecture. And postmodern architecture eventually becomes yet another style. So style as in it's a visual image where we're defining architecture by nouns, not understanding it as, from the materials that it's made from, and always looking for yet another change in the visual image. And of course, nowadays they tend to change as often as possible. Again, another moment of crisis, if you like, in the last few years, and hopefully most of you will know Edward R. Ford, who's looking at it in the same way that Semper and Bertica would have looked at it, from a slightly different angle, perspective, and he defines 5 types of detail. And really what he's talking about is there are details that are formed by just looking at a drawing, a beautiful drawing that you might have made, and then trying to make it work. Yeah? While other details are understanding the materials and structure at hand, and the architecture is defined from that. You might ask, well, so what? So what's the big deal? Let's have architecture that can look like anything and let anybody else construct it how they wish. What's the big deal? We might ask, there are ethical questions to how we make things. What ethical questions are those? You know, we develop a skill. Do we need to answer any ethical questions with that skill? Well, I think we probably do. You know very well that buildings have to stand up and not fall on people's heads. They mustn't burst into flames. Hopefully we don't burn too much energy to heat them. Not send our clients bust. And of course today, more urgently than ever, it's the embodied carbon of those materials, those material choices. In effect, nothing to do with the appearance of the building. Yeah? So we're not talking about defining architecture by the appearance of the building. And I think there was a chap here called Protagoras. So Protagoras is a 450 BC Greek teacher. And he's really what we call the first relativist. So he's essentially saying there are no real immutable rules to anything. It's up to us to negotiate, make those decisions, and obviously renegotiate them on a regular basis, which is essentially what we might define as a sort of ethical framework for architects today. So let's talk about what we're trying to do. So at the bottom of this image is a speculative tower made of stone. So after doing a couple of projects in stone, we were asked to run an exhibition, and for that we asked one of the largest developers in London, Canary Wharf, give us a typical brief. We just want to test whether it's possible to make a building in stone with structural engineers, environmental engineers, mechanical electrical engineers, and so on, the full design team, including cost consultants. And what we found was that we wanted to make it 100% in stone, but we wanted to compare it against steel and concrete. And you can see there on the far right is if the building was using a concrete frame. Coming in from the right, a steel frame. Scenario 2 is actually, so on the far left is 100% stone. You can see the embodied carbon of a building is a fraction. It's about 40% if it was concrete, a tiny percent compared to steel. I think it's about 10%. And then scenario 2 is where we're using timber. Timber is floor plates, but the skeleton of the stone a skeleton of the frame is stone. And what that immediately tells you is that if you are counting the sequestered carbon in timber, you've created an office building which is better for the planet. In other words, you've absorbed carbon from the atmosphere. Yeah. it also turned out it was the timber and stone version was cheaper than the concrete or steel version by about 10%, which to a developer of that scale is not a small, insignificant amount. So we carried on with, we teach, so we asked some of our postgrad students to help us because we're only doing one project at a time, learning one project at a time. We thought, well, we put 14 brains together and let's bring as many materials and record what their embodied carbon is. And initially they were all sorts of muddled order, and we realized, well, if you put them from worst to best, we'll quickly find aluminium at the top at almost 20,000 kilos per cubic meter, and freshly sawn hardwood at minus 1,000, and stone somewhere in the middle. I mean, you know, in the middle of that table, we're obviously a fraction of the embodied carbon. And hypothetically, if you decide to make your entire building out of timber, again, you've made the world a better place. But obviously you can't have the electrical, the plumbing, the windows, the glazed windows, and so on in timber. So at some point you have to make a selection. And this is not to say, the reason we made a color code, a traffic light system, is like, imagine going to your supermarket and pushing your trolley along. It's not to say you're banned from ever putting a bit of red in your basket. It's just to remind you, yes, of course you can have a mixed diet and occasionally put some, I don't know, lardons or something to mix with your salad. It's not eliminating steel or concrete. It's simply saying, make some intelligent choices. We might actually try and get some projects now. So the first project we used stone on was a renovation of a house where they wanted the original staircase back. It was originally stone staircase, but actually used steel. We suggested reusing an older method of making of stone staircases where they use nothing but the stone itself, and it's what's called reciprocally loaded. So one tread is resting the load on the other. And while we were there, we noticed these big blocks of stone coming in, and it occurred to us, well, you know, at the moment, most of us are working on, most of us as architects around the planet really are working on stone buildings where it's a steel frame or a concrete frame with cladding, multiple layers of waterproofing, fireproofing, insulation, vapor barriers, things that punch through all that and then come out and reseal before you get a veneer. Surely that's a slightly absurd way of putting this building together. It's just a question. We didn't know the answer. It's a part of London that had no development on it until the Norman invasion, and it was all a series of nunneries and monasteries, all in limestone. That over the years, because it was not in the city, outside the city walls, the laws were quite lax, so it became a place of pamphleteering and printing revolutionary ideas all the way into the early 20th century. And our neighbor is actually now the Marx Memorial Library, where Karl Marx, it was actually started by William Morris, but Marx wrote for it, Lenin used the printing presses. It's always been a place of radicalism until the post-war period. So we looked at, well, look, instead of building as the post-war period has done with these steel frames and pretending that the brick and the stone is actually load-bearing, let's ask the question, is it possible? Is it cheaper? Does the embodied carbon come down? And these are questions that the entire building industry in the UK anyways appears to have forgotten. So we were learning on the job, and really the project is about teaching, not just us, but anybody who comes to visit the building, that the superstructure of the building is as simple as it can possibly be, almost Neolithic. You pick up one stone, put it on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. And it's only today's technology that allows a thermal break to lift stones and transport them and lift them to that level. Otherwise, the technology of putting one stone on top of the other is millennia old. I'll try and get through to the next project. So this is us making use of waste stone with an Italian, there's an Italian group of stonemasons who find that there's a vast amount of wastage in the tile industry. What can you do with it? At the moment it's crushed, it's waiting to be crushed and made into other materials. With this Italian company, what we've done is broken those tiles on formwork, on a timber formwork, and then rebonded them with a basalt cement. It occurred to us after making this 30 millimeter shell and using it as structure, why not bond insulation within that, and then it becomes external finish, internal finish, and thermal envelope at the same time. Since then, what else can we replace in terms of steel structure and concrete structure? So we've been doing a number of research projects and actually building them. So luckily we've got some clients who are quite happy to experiment. This is our group of students on a 14-meter long beam where, again, you don't know these answers until you're looking for asking stupid questions. Can I get a 14-meter long piece of stone to span? And, well, you probably could, but it would be very hard to find, expensive. Why not just cut it into smaller pieces and put 1 or 2 rods in there to span that? And there's the answer. It turns out to be high performing. It lasts better in a fire than steel or concrete, so we burnt it for 3 hours and it had its structural integrity for 3 hours. So you only actually need it for 2 hours. This is one where it's on site now. It's where we were using limestone, but we tested basalt, and basalt born from a volcano it performs far better than limestone. So keep asking the questions. Your experts, the stonemasons and engineers, will help with those answers. Together, you'll get to those answers. So these are the various, I think, yeah, there we go. That's good timing. So hopefully the takeaway is ultimately the slide on the embodied carbon. Hopefully none of you are allergic to fast flashing slides. Oops, there we go. Yeah, so make whatever building you're looking at, look at the stone. They're at 33, 32 kilos per cubic meter compared to brick. Yeah. In England, or the UK, we import pretty much most bricks. And I was at a similar event in London with 6 assembled architects who were going to be, one of which was going to be chosen as the master architect of that year. And to get the questions rolling, I asked, all of you have used brick, yeah. Some of it Belgian brick, some of it Danish brick, some of it German. All looks beautiful, but why brick? Oh, well, you know, there's a tradition now to use brick. It's easy to get through planning departments and conservation, and it looks nice. And I said, well, why not stone? Oh, well, the people don't understand stone, big pieces of stone. I said, well, stone is just a monolithic stuff underneath our feet. If you cut it to a brick, why not use that? We asked, and I've asked one of our sponsors here today, if you cut piece of stone to the size of a brick, so you don't confuse anybody, they can still get their conservation area consent and get it through planning, make apparently the population happy because they like brick. If you cut it, how much would you sell it for? So our sponsor today told us it was, I think it was 80 euros for one brick. And if any of you use brick on a regular basis, in the UK, the cheapest brick is £1, yeah? And obviously you go up to the Peter Zumthor type brick, which is several pounds. Well, I think once you've got the choice, 2 of them in your hand, the stone one or the clay-fired brick, why would you choose one that's more than 10 times the embodied carbon than the stone one? I mean, I'd hope all of you now that you know this knowledge would not make that choice. So really that's the takeaway. Make an intelligent decision. Learn, we didn't know all this stuff. Learn of those materials and then begin to make intelligent decisions on what your building is made of. That is no longer just a beautiful drawing that somebody else is helping you to put together, but you're thinking well in advance, what are my material choices and how can I bring them together to form this architecture, define this new architecture. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Amin Taha and Bas Smets, for both of you for your lectures. And so, as Lara already promised us, we are going to have a small conversation on in reaction of the lectures and on the topic of the theme of the evening. And I know you are still getting your breath, but I'm going to start with you, Amin, because you were one of the projects that you showed is the Clerkenwell Close project. And there was a lot of discussion about the project. It's a project where also your office is situated, and now it's in the heart of London. And there was a lot of discussion about it in the neighborhood, but also in the press. And what was it about, and was it in relation with the material that was used?
Yes, it was entirely the stone facade. Because we hadn't worked in stone before, and initially we thought, well, it must be just plainly cut. Our stonemason was offering various types of finish, including natural. And natural, if most of you have had stonemasons visit you, tends to be done with a flame and a chisel to break the surface of the stone. Then we went to visit a quarry, and we found that the quarry master was showing us that a sedimentary stone will split, open up, and reveal fossils, quartz, etc. So the natural really is much more than sawn stone. And why would you throw away the fossils and other features, the fossils as it were, fossilized surface, and create it artificially? But it's natural. And what you don't know is where it's going to arrive exactly. And if you're looking for minimal wastage, what you do realize is you've got a block that can be cut into certain sizes for columns and beams. And then you know, okay, there's maybe some natural here, there's a saw cut, there's a drill cut. But again, unless you buy it well in advance of your planning application, you don't know. So unlike a factory-made material where you can buy it in advance, one brick, show it to the planning department, say, I want to make 100% out of this. It's natural, you don't know. So our agreement was, we're going to use these three types of finishes. We've got no idea where they're going to go. Unfortunately for us, the planning officer left the local authority. So you're left with drawings that don't show a finish, but photographs that show what types of finishes you might get. And unfortunately, I was. This is a lesson to all of you. I was telling somebody in the car, I'm tempted to write emails, aggressive emails as a response to idiotic questions. The best thing to do is just write it and then put it into draft. Yeah? And we had a councillor who sits on the planning committee who was looking for promotion to become chair of the planning committee. And our building had never had any complaints from any of the neighbours, so it went through by what's called delegated powers, the power of the planning officer. But the councillor sits on planning committee, was convinced it must pass his eyes. So he said, well, this possibly can't have planning permission. This is after the building finished. It must be illegal. I'm going to campaign to have it demolished. And of course, the press asked me my opinion, and instead of putting the email into draft, I pressed send and said, how this man can think he can become chair of planning committee after having said all these things, which show that he's, one, technically ignorant, doesn't understand the planning system. He says he's an architectural technician, yet he thinks this is concrete, not stone. And he thinks it's not load-bearing. It means that he's not even qualified as an architectural technician. Basically, I went all out. Yeah. And, of course, it was war. And then he spent 2 years at war with me, which, you know, don't
It was
send those
also
emails.
because in the neighborhood where this building is situated, the building regulations ask for brick, right?
Well, okay. There's a general guideline. Every conservation area in the country has general guidelines saying use the predominant material, but it's up to the conservation officer. So unfortunately, we have planning officers, conservation officers, enforcement officers. The guideline says you must fit in, you must conform, you must respect. It's a sort of language that we, you know, sociologists might have concerns with. You must look like, yeah. Effectively, if we said, you know, we all have to dress the same, speak the same, look the same, think the same, yeah. It was written in the 1970s and it hasn't moved on. So it's slightly absurd. And we had a very good and intelligent conversation with our planning officer. He agreed all this, it's absurd. Even the conservation officer agreed and said, look, yes, what's happened is a self-fulfilling prophecy of all post-war buildings in this area trying to look like Georgian buildings, basically 17th, 18th and 19th century buildings. But really they're steel frames with a thin skin of brick held up every floor, trying to look like that, but without the original proportions or the brick type, the mortar joints and all the rest of it. So it's watering down the actual heritage it's aiming to respect. And that's not an intelligent conversation between people, let alone urban-wise, and then us learning about our heritage. So they were quite happy. They said, use stone, see what you can do with stone. And it was that challenge that remember, he's a politician, the councillor, who's sitting on the planning committee, that he didn't understand. He couldn't understand that conversation. He was the one saying, why shouldn't it be brick like all the lovely neighbouring buildings, which, and if you come to visit, you'll realise a sort of, you know, unfortunately for me to just define as hideous 1970s.
It's only a small piece of brick and there's no brick behind.
Yeah.
But like you said, there are some advantages of stone are in the embodied carbon, but also in the fact that you have all these sedimentary layers still in them, and it's a sort of beauty in it. And I would like to refer to what you said, Bas, before, also with the Biospheric chair that you made, but also maybe with other projects that you said, if I could choose, I would rather build with stone and trees, or make projects with stone and trees. And has it also to do with this, with the fact that you cannot really predict what stone is going to give, because there's some natural quality in it that you cannot control?
It's that, but it's also the fact that stone is this compression of material that reminds you of the biospheric processes that I think is very interesting. So it's not it needs time to make, and the fact that the biosphere is producing those stones, it can be volcanic stone, it can be metamorphosed stone, it can be sediment stone, is I like this idea of making stuff with stuff that's there. Like if we go back to the Alps, I love when you walk through the Alps and you have this little path that's marked by just stones put on top of the others. So ideally, I like this idea of working with what's there, but transforming it into a new form. And in that sense, stones, or as the concrete elements that we made with those granulates from stones, is a very interesting material. So you have the kind of unpredictability, but also this idea of this compression, especially with blue stones. I mean, it's made of all these shells, all those fossils, of course, is former life. So I like this idea of this, I don't know, this kind of cycle between living organisms and organisms producing materials that we built with.
But of course, you could. That's the beauty of the which is inherent of the material. But then again, we were also talking about the ecological quality of stone compared to concrete, for example, because you could perfectly make all the concrete blocks that you are now have made in stone. You could make them, prefabricate them, put them. It would be much more easy. Maybe you would not have the delays that you had now with the quarry. But is it also one of your concerns that the ecological factor of the stone compared to other materials?
Yes, but there's many things, because there's the materiality, but there's also the size of it. For example, the monuments we made for the COVID victims, those pieces are too big to make them in stone. That's why we use stone to make concrete, because they're 2 meters 50 long. If you need a monolith block like that, you have too much waste to be able to produce it. So there's also the kind of dimensions that play with that. But this idea and we visited many quarries, this idea of using stone, but also thinking about what to do with what's left over. When we made with Eliane, when we made a biospheric bench, we went to those quarries and we thought, what can we do with what's left over? Can we not cut it into a certain size and make something new with it? A bit what we did with Lomel in the end, when we did the hardscape based on the 20 centimeter leftover material that they would cut. So this idea of using stone as a prime material, as we did in the monument for the victims of the attacks, but also thinking about how to use all the stones that is produced in the process of making that prime material. I think that's a very interesting path.
And then maybe coming back to the embodied carbon, which you mentioned a lot. You made we saw the diagram and we saw the comparison that you made between other materials. But does that mean that we should all build in stone now?
Well, ideally, we've got an issue in the UK with, since the Grenfell fire, we're not allowed to use flammable material in the envelope of the building. So obviously that building had plastic coated in aluminium. Unfortunately, there was a desire to get the law changed immediately. And the law was changed and the wording wasn't very brilliant, and it said no flammable material whatsoever. And things like timber, cross-laminated timber, down-laminated timber, which performs quite well in a fire, charring rate, and it keeps the structural integrity, were also banned. So my first request would be, on looking at that table of materials, is whatever building you're doing, look to do it 100% in timber as a hypothetical idea, and obviously then begin to pull other materials out that you have no choice about. So you possibly don't want to face it in timber, perhaps not. So even if it's a single-story, two-story building, it could be entirely in timber, but the facing of it could be in stone. So the facing is just a self-supporting series of bricks that go up a story or two or six, supporting themselves and held with brick ties back to the timber. And overall, that building would still be carbon negative. Now, there is an issue with defining it as carbon negative, that if you demolish that building in the next 20 years, whatever it is, 200 years, and you take that timber and you put it into landfill to rot, or you burn it for fuel, the carbon is back in the atmosphere. So you do have to write, if you want to define it as carbon negative, you have to write a land covenant. So in England, it's fairly straightforward. You have what's called planning conditions, Section 106 agreement, legal document telling you can't, if it's an office or a factory, you can only operate during these hours, you can't make this much noise. If it's residential, only you and a family can live in there, etc., etc. You can do the same. You can put the material schedule into that legal document saying that any time that building is touched for refurbishment or demolition, that timber has to be reused. That will then allow you to count the sequestered carbon. It also allows you to reduce your carbon tax, and if it's negative, you're not paying anything. So there are immediately advantages there. But yes, I would urge everybody to try and make as much out of timber as possible, and then where you can't, you begin to use stone. The reason we're doing stone towers is because unlike other parts of the world where you can make your towers out of timber, we can't in the UK, and then why not use an exoskeleton of stone instead?
It's also a question of craftsmanship. You told me that it was very difficult to find stonemasons in the UK to do the work.
Yes, so well, I mean, probably all over the world they're difficult to find who actually know what they're doing. So in France, I don't know what it's like here, but in France they still have the Companion of Masons, and it takes 7-8 years to graduate, where you're learning how to cut stone, dimension stone for structural purposes, as well as decoration, restoration projects. Well, in the UK, we're only training them to basically restore, decorate, yeah. So we don't have that many masons, and really you can't wait. Do we wait for masons do we train more? One, they're highly skilled, they charge a lot of money, it takes a long time to train them, but why not therefore make bricks out of stone? That means any bricklayer can do it, any builder can do it. And then the frames can be post-tensioned pieces of stone that an engineer and any main contractor can do as well. Yeah.
Okay, but then even still thinking of the ecological aspect of stone, because stone, it takes a lot of energy to be cut, it takes a lot of water to be polished, and then of course you have a quarry, which is like this open scar in the landscape, and I'm looking at you, Bas, as a landscape architect. What do you think of it? What can be done to the landscape, and what is the impact of a quarry, and what can be done afterwards?
There is many regulations to that. Most of them are backfilled with stuff that's not used or replanted. Some of them become open water pits. But I think there is I think it could be a very interesting landscape project, of course, not just trying to hide the hole that had been made, or to just stabilize it, but to see it as a new kind of maybe quite brutal but interesting landscape that could be imagined. But so far, it's a good question, because so far when we speak up to quarries, they have an obligation to bring it back to, as much as possible, a pristine state. I mean, that's kind of the 19th century idea behind those regulations, and so they comply to that, of course, because they need to extract the stones. But it's not seen as an opportunity for a new landscape, and I think the moment you brutally take out that stone, you alter that state. I mean, and if that's allowed, it should become something entirely different. So that's maybe for those who are in the quarry business, it's maybe a good idea to think of that.
I mean, there are questions often asked. One, will we run out of stone? Well, to answer that, just imagine a section through the planet. There's magma, boiling molten stone, and we're living on that tiny little crust that stopped boiling. Yeah, we're never going to run out of stone. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of stone to build a city. Two, oh my God, all those quarries. Well, stone is a quarry where you take the stone out and you take it to where you want to construct your building. That's it. Yeah. You don't need to spend a lot of water or polish it, unless do you really want every stone building to be highly polished like a floor tile? It can be just cut out and put into place. That's why the embodied carbon on simply cut and taken to site is 33 kilograms per cubic meter, against something like concrete or steel. Now, steel takes about 9 quarries to make. There's I can't remember them all the different ingredients that go into steel, but that's 9 quarries. Concrete, cement, is also 8 quarries. And guess what? The cement is made from stone. It's made from limestone. So you crush the limestone, you burn it at 1,600 degrees, you turn it into a powder, you mix it with other elements, you then have to mix it with sand and water and aggregate, and even then, its strength is lost 60% compared to the original limestone. So then you have to put steel in it, more steel, to bring its strength back up. Now, putting it like that, it makes reinforced concrete sound absurd. But it's obviously had its uses, it'll continue to have its uses. But the question is to then stand back at every design instead of simply saying, yeah, it's reinforced concrete or mild steel. Can I make this out of stone? So ultimately there'll be fewer quarries if we all start building in stone and timber than there are today.
Fewer quarries, so that's where we're going. Okay, I would like to... You want to react on that, Bas, or...?
Fewer quarries to landscape.
No, but I think I agree with what you said, and I go back to the project we did in Lomel, where we used the stone as cut, like no treatment, yeah. and that was the only way to reduce the price and so the CO2. So I think that it always, when I go to quarries, it always pains me when, I mean, I love rocks, and it always pains me that in the end it's like a stupid tile, you know. Like, I mean, so the question is, how can we? And for example, in Lomel, when we use those big rocks, those rocks that had some veins that could not be used as a tile. So I think there's still so much to explore with these stones, and to bring them. It's a piece of nature that we can bring into the city, I think. So yeah, I think yeah, still much to be explored.
Okay, still much to be explored. I suggest that we wrap up this conversation, that we have it maybe afterwards, that we develop it afterwards with a drink. I would like to thank Bas, very much for your lecture and for your debate here. I would like to thank you, all of you, to be here tonight. And I hope you also will come to our next lectures. We have a lecture next month, at the end of the month as well, with Neural Road. We have other different lectures that we have also. We have Brutter, we have the Across lectures. I hope you will all be there. And I would also like to present to you the last issue of A+, that has just been finished, and that is on sale in the bookstore. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.